Hello. So in this video we're going to talk about Alan Ball's film Uncle Frank. Now, first, I want you to know that I am extremely reluctant to give the Amazon Corporation credit for any sort of aesthetic achievement. They are the pinnacle of global capitalism, and I fundamentally don't approve of that. But Uncle Frank is a fantastic movie. Basically, it is... So I think there's, interestingly, sort of two levels to this. Basically, it is the story of Frank Bledsoe, who is from a very traditional South Carolina family, very conservative. This is set in the... Most of the film is set in the 70s, by the way. He is living in New York, teaching English at a university. As am I. I'm not living in New York City, but teaching English at a university. And he's gay, which his family doesn't know about. So his dad knows. And for most of the film, for part of the film, we know that his dad knows. But for most of the film, the impression is that no one in the family knows. When his dad dies, he and his niece Beth, who's come to study at NYU, and basically Uncle Frank is sort of her hero. So she's come to study at NYU because that's where he is. He inspired her to change her name. He inspired her to pursue her dreams, etc., etc. When they find out that the patriarch of the family, Mac, has died, Frank's father, Beth's grandfather, they drive down to South Carolina, and a good portion of the film takes place on the road trip itself, or in the sort of preparations leading up to the funeral ceremony. And Waleed, who's Frank's partner, is trying to convince Frank to come out to his family. He's trying to convince Frank to let him meet the family, and Frank really, really, really does not want this. He is adamantly opposed to this. What ends up happening after the funeral, they have the reading of the will, in which, from beyond the grave, like a total fucking asshole, Mac Bledsoe outs his son as gay. At which point, Frank, who we know by this point is a recovering alcoholic, who has been drinking throughout to get through this funeral, Frank takes off, and he goes to the place where, through a series of flashbacks, we've learned that his first lover committed suicide because of something that Frank had said after his father caught them together. So Frank carries this tremendous amount of guilt, this tremendous burden, because his father basically said, "You're going to become a pervert and you're going to hell," which Frank then basically told Sam, his first love, and Sam killed himself, as unfortunately too many LGBT people have over the decades and continue to do. And so Frank, after having been outed in his father's will, goes to the spot where Sam had killed himself, where Sam had drowned himself in the lake. And desperate to find him, Wally goes by Wally. Wally and Beth go to that lake because Wally knows what that lake means. So they go to that lake and they find Frank's clothing and the matching chain that he and Wally wear. And they can't find Frank, so they think that he has killed himself the way that Sam did. Fortunately, that's not where the movie ends. They go back to the hotel, extremely distraught, and finally Frank shows up. He had gone swimming drunk. Wally tries to prevent him from drinking anymore, and they have a fight in which Frank punches Wally and uses a number of homophobic slurs, channeling his father, before going to Sam's grave, where Wally again finds him. Sorry, getting a little choked up. It's that fucking good a movie. See it, people? But, so the film actually ends on a happy note. It really does, as heart-wrenching as it is. Frank and Wally are at Sam's grave. Frank is convinced that he's lost his family. And Beth arrives. And Wally is trying to comfort him. Beth arrives and says she's been sent to come get Frank and bring him back to the house. The brother about whom Frank is really worried is Mike. Mike is racist. Mike has inherited a lot of their father's prejudices. And when Frank, Beth, and Wally show up at the house, Mike, who actually is Beth's father, is sitting on the front steps. And it's a tense moment. This is 1973 in South Carolina. We have someone who we know is racist. We have someone who we suspect would be homophobic. And Mike says to Frank, "We got 2 words for you. No problem." And this is the family's response. There's one guy in the family, an in-law, who's not on board. If I can't think of the actor's name off the top of my head. If there's one character, if there's one performance that I don't think is fantastic in this film, it's his. I don't care for this actor. He played Ray in Remember the Titans, and I didn't care for him in that movie either. But anyway, the family as a whole, in their sometimes awkward, sometimes clumsy, sometimes still somewhat homophobic way, the family embraces Frank and Wally. So there's that. So that's the basic plot line, and it's beautifully written. It's beautifully shot. Sorry, the camera is sort of shifting. My cat, also incidentally named Frank, unrelated though, is sort of walking around on the footstool that I use as a camera mount. So it's beautifully written, is one thing. And again, almost every performance I think is fantastic. Like it's acted incredibly well. It's heart-wrenching to the nth degree. Really really well stylized, really well filmed, etc., etc. One of the other things I think is really interesting about the film, and one of the things that I think draws you in as a viewer, is that we have a kind of misdirection here. So I said earlier on that there are sort of two plot lines, which is not necessarily true, but there's an implied opening plot line, and then the main plot line that develops. So this is one of the things that's structurally very interesting about the film, because it starts out with the implication that this is going to be Beth's coming-of-age story, and to a certain extent it is. We start out in 1969, she's 14, and she's inspired by Uncle Frank. So, and then we skip to 4 years later, she's enrolled as a freshman at NYU. So we have that coming-of-age setup. She has her first boyfriend, nearly has her first sexual experience. But that's a misdirection, because it's not really Beth's coming-of-age story. In a bizarre way, it's Frank's coming-of-age story. Even though he's already an adult, he's settled into his life. But it's a coming-out story. It's a story about finding love and acceptance with a family that you thought would not accept you, which is definitely the aspiration of many, many LGBT people, I believe. It's even in 2020, for many people, coming out is fraught with danger, fraught with anxiety and uncertainty. And it's a beautiful thing to see a story in which it doesn't matter, in which it is no problem.